Okay, we're both recording, we're both connected, and this is Here and Now with Steve Struggle of the great U.S. tradition of the Panthers, and myself of the great Jewish tradition of the Jewish Bund from my family from Warsaw, from the Warsaw Ghetto. So here we are. We've formed a revolutionary alliance here
Yep.
of two revolutionary movements. Well, revolutionary thought movements. We are a representative of the political theory, the thought that gave rise to the dynamic revolutionary movements of the Black Panthers and the Jewish Bund. This, I'm very sort of pleased that we're in our fourth year of broadcasting here on our dual platform of these historic movements that we represent. And the younger generations haven't a clue as to what has happened in the past, because they haven't been taught. They have not been taught, revolutionary history. No
Yeah.
way.
They have not. It's quite apparent they haven't been taught it. And it's quite apparent we've got to find some way to get it taught or build organizations that will do that through part of their political work to organize for revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be the only way to do it because I don't want to blame the parents per se, but they haven't taught them. No, they haven't. Trust me, they haven't. And the mass media is
Ah,
is going to support the ruling class. So yeah, you're right. A lot of things are not. A lot of history is being not used to serve the present.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, what is a movement built with? It's built upon ideas. That's basically, like what a movement is.
Right.
And if they don't have the ideas of the past, like the younger generations think that they've invented it all, that they don't have to pay any attention to anybody who's older than 30 years or or what, what's the game? Like is it for fun that they're running around, or do they really want to build a movement that is going to bring about, what they want? They don't know how to do it. And they're not looking, they're not asking, how to do it either. They think they know it all, so, well, they're going to get lost and then they'll come running. Okay, fine. Now, what's happening here and there? Well, Trump or Trump, I just heard on Al Jazeera, is imposing 10% additional tariff on the NATO allies that are sending observer military to Greenland, which is its real name,
Yeah.
to sort of, symbolically tell the United States to back off.
Well,
Because
I think that there was a discussion. The reason I'm interjecting here because this is something that I've been studying kind of closely from different perspectives, and I think that the Europeans need to get a grip and realize the United States is no longer their friend.
hmm,
They're not an ally. I would kick the U.S. military bases. I shut them all down. See, because if your ally is charging you money on your trade because he wants to steal your land, he said your ally is now your enemy. He's evil. I just see it as evil. So Europe needs to get a grip on the reality, as does a few other countries who I'm not going to mention right now, and realize that the United States is their enemy and at it, and they should send troops. As a matter of fact, if the United States attempts to take Greenland by force, Europe should go to war on the United States. They should. They should just go to war. I'm advocating self-defense, a self-defense war.
hmm,
You can't just still. I mean, you just grab the head of state and put them
Hmm.
in your jail.
Hmm.
What's next? What's
Yeah.
next? I mean, I mean, you're supposed to have some kind of, they should be kicked out the UN, as far as I'm concerned,
Hmm.
or a vote of censure in the General Assembly. You grab a head of state that you made up that you fabricated a case against. You bring them to your country, put them in your jails, and now you're telling another country, "We want your land, we're going to take it." No,
Hmm.
Europe should put troops there. They should put troops there, and they should throw down if the U.S. tries to seize the land. They should throw down. I mean, that's the kind of war. That's a real inter-imperialist war there. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's your inter-imperialist war right there.
Hmm.
And the people of those countries should, protest getting at the U.S. embassies and tell the U.S. embassies to get out of here. I mean, sometimes you just gotta say, look, this is enough. And since they're such good friends, NATO is simply something they should be either kicked out of or dissolved, which Russia and China would love very much. That'd be it. Great. I know he's really his his proposals are so inimical to multilateral relations. And unfortunately, the American population is unable to even fathom. Well, I'm not going to say that, but large numbers of Americans don't know what's going on. But the polls say that Americans are against Greenland. They actually, some say they're against Maduro's being arrested. But I hope that Europe does take a stand, and maybe somebody can negotiate something. But if he sends troops to Greenland, Europe has to they have to fight the troops.
Hmm.
To me, they just can't let the United States take their land. No, I don't care about the connection between Greenland and Denmark. I understand Denmark's got a funky connection with Greenland, but you can't just we need the land for our security, so if we're going to take it. Well, then what else are you going to do? That's called stealing.
Yeah. Well.
I'm hungry. I'm gonna go to the store and steal. Well, I understand you're hungry. Yeah, I'm the store owner. I'm gonna stop you. So we have a problem here, right? Right.
Yeah.
And who gonna
Uh,
come? It's just I don't know. The U.S. is really showing an aggressive, demonic, villain, evil, criminal, thieving hand that the world should really start looking at. Because once the world said, we're tired of this, the world has, the US can't respond to the whole world. They can respond to certain countries. People are
hmm.
going to stop using the dollar. Trade, I mean, travel's already in the toilet of the United States. Travel,
Yeah.
I mean, there are friends of mine who are on a passport legally visiting the United States, and they want to go to Canada or Mexico. I said, you better not do it. They might not let your ass back in. They might grab you at the airport and put you in the ICE detention facility. So they
Hmm.
so they didn't go.
Wow.
Some people who are students on visas are not going home because they're scared they're
Yeah.
going to get grabbed by ICE or Border
Yeah.
Patrol when they come back, or not let back in. Why should you have those kind of, if you're here legally on a visa,
Yeah.
why should you have those kind of fears?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I'm blocked from the United States myself. I can't go to the United States. If I try to go to the United States and I present myself at the border, they're going to say that I'm on American territory and they'll put me into prison for 30 days.
that's
That's the
right,
law.
right. You're so even going to the border crossing puts you under this jurisdiction.
Yeah. One
You,
time I was
you
passing
can't
through New York, on transit, and you don't have a transit, like in New York, at the airport, you have to sort of go out of, customs into the United States,
and then
pick
come
up your
back in.
bags, and then install yourself for the next flight, so when I did that, they said, "Oh, you're not supposed to be here," and then they put me into detention for 6 hours. I was my leg was chained to a bench. I think I have a photo of that. Oh,
God.
and then, but they were very polite to me, like, they sort of, sort of considered that my record, like of dealing in marijuana and such at one point, to finance our political center here in Montreal, was, just a joke. In fact, like it's legal in Canada now in any case, so they didn't take it seriously. But because Canada handed over, the police record of all Canadian citizens to the Department of Homeland Security of the United States of America, all of a sudden,
Why?
I'm from the United States. Just
Why?
like that.
Why they
Wow.
can't get why they can't get the records of Canadian citizens in the United States?
That was Harper from the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has always wanted to become, make Canada into a continental appendage of the United States of America. And last election, the Conservative Party, they were sort of, into this whole MAGA trip. They were into, they thought they were Americans. And but then Trump opened his big mouth
You sure it
and
didn't.
said that he wanted to annex Canada. And then all of a sudden, Canadians freaked out and said, "No way, no way, Jose." And uh, and so the Conservative Party lost support, and they ended up losing the election, even though they were supposed to be uh, have they were supposed to have had enough support, to win the election in the polls preceding the election itself. But on the election day, after Trump's mouth opened up there, he lost by 1 percentage point in the popular poll. And the party that won the election, Carney, is the prime minister now, former chairman of the Bank of England and chairman of the Bank of Canada. Um, they took the election, but not with a majority. So they're dependent upon the New Democratic Party, the Social Democratic Party. They're dependent upon Green Party, which has 1 seat and is planned to get the polls indicate it's going to be getting 2 seats. And then there's the Bloc Québécois, which is a left centrist nationalist party calling for the independence of Quebec, the uh, the French-speaking nation of Quebec, which is found here in the province of Quebec, as it's called. And so he lost. The conservatives and the Trumpists and the MAGA movement, they lost here in Canada. That was their first defeat. But, the United States, does not talk about that. No, no, no. There, nothing about, like the MAGA movement, like appendage in Canada having lost the election in Canada and turning the whole thing around against the United States. Now, as far as Greenland is concerned, Canada should be sending troops there to support the Inuit. That's an Inuit nation there.
Right? Yeah,
Most of
yeah,
the
yeah,
people living in
yeah.
Greenland there are
That's
Inuit,
right.
like
Yeah, it's just like
what
a
Americans call Eskimos.
it's just like Alaska is to the U.S. It's really an Alaska move.
Yeah,
It's Alaska too,
yeah,
except Alaska was I was occupied by white Americans, and then they made even though it was bought from Russia, it was occupied by white Americans to make it
yeah,
Alaska. It was just
yeah,
a territory land they had. It was kind of, yeah. So Greenland is another Alaska. Yeah.
yeah. And
So
so that's why
I want to ask
thinks he can
Alaska
buy
about
it.
it. Huh? See what?
Yeah, but he's offered to buy it. Anyway, he says
Okay.
the United States needs a Greenland one way or the other. Okay, one way or
One
the
way
other,
or the
quote.
other. Huh? Yeah, here we go with this shit
Okay,
again.
so he's offering to buy Greenland. Okay, what's he offering? He's offering $100,000 for every, like individual there. 100,000. That's cheap. Like you think they're going to buy a whole, island, largest island in the world, actually. You think he's going to buy that? It's 10 times bigger than England and he says he's going to buy it. Like just because he's offering to buy it doesn't mean that the offer has been accepted, but he thinks that any offer he makes has to be accepted, and if it's not accepted, then he's going to force them to accept it. Okay, that's what he thinks. Really? Okay, 100,000 cheap. Like so if he wants to get into a bidding war, like China can offer, $1 million per person, like, let's then they can start, bidding, on auction, like, and then, the Greenland is going to say, like, no way, we don't accept your offer. Okay. So why does Trump want Greenland? Why does he call it, essential to the national security of the United States of America? Because he wants to set up, this golden dome. Like what do they call it golden for? Like they're losing all their gold. Anyway, so he wants to set up a golden dome as a defense shield against any possible missile attack from Russia. I don't know why he's expecting Russia to attack the United States of America, perhaps because he is planning to attack Russia and
Exactly.
he wants
Exactly.
to prevent a retaliatory attack from Russia. So he wants to be in a position in which the United States can dominate, be a world dominating power again. And he wants to set up a golden dome with, defense missiles in Greenland, way far in the north there, so they can stop missiles, any possible, retaliatory attack from Russia against the first strike from the United States of America against Russia. Okay, he wants a defense against that. Okay. So they want to set up a defense missile base in the north there. Okay. Now, even in Canada here, we wouldn't allow U.S. missiles in here. In fact, I stopped the U.S. cruise missile from being tested in Western Canada with a peace camp on Parliament Hill in 1982 to 1983 to 1985, for which I was imprisoned. And that's also part of my record, which is why I'm barred from the United States. And like Canada's not going to accept, like U.S. missiles in the north of Canada as defense shield for the United States of America, because this would make Canada a target. And Canadians will not accept that. Canadians do not want U.S. missiles in Canada. This was a big issue in the 1950s as well, when the Diefenbaker government and when the prime minister of a conservative party went nationalist and said, no, no U.S. missiles. Because the United States wanted to install the Beaumark missile, as it was called at that time. And Canada said no. Even the Conservative Party said no. And because it would make Canada into a target. And, they weren't interested, Canada's not interested in defending the United States of America because they know the US is, provocative power and they don't want to become involved in war games of the United States. Okay, so now the United States thinks they can do the same thing with its Golden Dome set up in Greenland, but they're not going to get away with it. And, people are not, like into, uh, setting up a U.S. military base, that will defend it against, retaliatory attack after a first strike capacity the United States wants to have over Russia and China. Yeah. So Greenland is very important. Yes, but they're not going to get it. No way. No way, so to say.
I think it's gonna be harder. They might get Alberta if Alberta votes for independence. They
Mm.
might get Alberta. That's where when I read about this, that's why I wanted to show it on the screen, but I can't show it now. Um,
Yeah.
there's
Alberta
a
is like
guy,
a province of Canada.
yeah,
Yeah.
they might now that they might get since there's so many Americans there who want to be, I guess, part of America again or a state. And believe me,
Yeah.
they'll lose their health care. See, I mean, this whole independence thing, they better be careful about that
Okay.
because because just because you have oil doesn't mean that you can fund everything you currently have. You're going to lose something.
Yeah.
There are benefits to being part of a bigger country, like it or not. And
Yeah.
I would think that they would, unless someone's really thought this out. Um,
It hasn't been thought out, because if Alberta it declares its unilateral independence from Canada by referendum or something or other, like Quebec tried to do previously, which is it is about to do again. If Alberta declares itself independent, well, the indigenous nations of Alberta who live in the north, who in most of the north, can also declare independence from Alberta. And they're the ones, who live on the oil fields.
as a
And
matter of fact, again, we need to cover that story in some more depth because that is a good question. Would those native lands automatically be would their sovereignty then switch to Alberta, or would they be independent of Alberta? That's a good question.
Yeah. So if Alberta can declare independence, so can they, you know? So, and then, if Alberta, sends in the police, to try to stop them from stopping the oil rigs from coming in, well, then Canada can go in there and support the Indigenous nations against
Yeah,
such
if
intrusion,
if
uh, and
if
we would do it.
and will the natives have the right to vote in this referendum? This is a lot to ask because I would think I wouldn't go with the independence if I were the native, unless I'm not a Canada, I'm not native, but anybody who I hate to say this, but they're mostly white people. I hate to bring color of skin in the situation, but I would not trust them
Hmm.
until they show me they can't be trusted.
And also, they're very concentrated. They don't live in the city. They don't live on the land. They live in a city in the
Right.
south, and then they claim, to have control over the whole territory. Huge territory, like it's not Canada's very much bigger than the United States, of course.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's much bigger. I mean, yeah, it's it. I mean, and I want to explain why I said they're white people, because part of the part of the part of the way that this world is really screwed up is how the descendants of Europe have 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 gone all over the world, and in most instances have brought plunder and evil and bad situations to the native people. There
Yeah.
hasn't been, I mean, that's just they, let's say they would have been black people from Europe. That it would have been, whatever they would, that's how you identify the settlers, unfortunately, is their color of skin or their ethnicity. It's kind of how it's done,
Yeah.
really. I mean, that's kind of how it's done. Even when
Mm.
black people went to Liberia as part of the colonization society and set up Liberia as a place where blacks could go to get out of slavery, it still was a form of colonization of the land. And the people who did it were of the mixture of the African tribes that came to the United States. So it means there is an identifiable characteristic to it. So I wouldn't try to be anti-white. I'm just saying I would be cautious of those people, of any movements they have, will
Mm.
say, we're your friends. Mm.
Mm.
I,
Yeah.
I, I would be careful. That's just me. And not
There's a
because of
certain.
the color of skin, it's because,
Mm.
the history of being stabbed in the back and being um, lied to and fooled and manipulated. Who's to say that the Aboriginal people of in that territory called Canada will get the same deal? Who's to say? You don't know what
Mm.
they're gonna do. No, you don't.
Mm.
Why should you trust them?
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Because the
I'm just saying.
indigenous nations were genocided in the United States. In
Yeah,
Canada, they weren't genocided, they were just enslaved.
right. So you have a, I'm saying, be careful. People who carry alms and food. I mean, and have. I mean, I would really love to do more research on what is the status, the real status of the natives, of the indigenous people in Alberta. What's their real status?
Hmm.
As far as
Hmm.
where they live, are they in reservation, and it's just the whole thing. Because the belief is that Canada has, quote, done a better job, end quote, with native rights than the United States. That is the current myth, be it true or not. I don't know if it's a myth. So how would
There's the biggest differences, are that, Canada hasn't been able to get away with, taking over the indigenous lands, to the extent the United States has, because Canada didn't have as many settlers coming there from United States, from Europe, like, the German Americans, unemployed German American Germans, who came to the United States, for free land and took over the whole Midwest, which are all majority German American now. That's a nuance that should be introduced, when talking about, the white colonialization,
yeah,
because the United States, it had a dual sort of, like aspect to it, which is now playing out in terms of the difference between the Republicans and Democrats, because the Republicans are now representing the German American population, which is 26%, And the Democratic Party has represented the Anglo-American population, settler colonial population, which represent 27%. But they look like they're majority, in New England, where they're called Yankees. The reason they're called Yankees is because, they're not German Americans, they're Anglo Americans. And they've always had been, competitive with each other. And now, the German Americans, they want to have, the upper sort of echelon of the American economy in their hands, whereas previously it was in the hands of the Anglo Americans. So that's where that game is playing out. Now, Canada has something which is not very well known, because there's uh, two territories in the north which are now autonomous, which are now, majority indigenous, territories, and
Right.
they're huge territories. They used to be called the Northwest Territories. Now they're called the Yukon, and I guess the other one is still called the Northwest Territories. And they even have their own autonomous legislatures, so they have, a degree of independence, much like in Greenland, which is an autonomous territory of Denmark, in which they have their local legislature, which is, of course, majority Inuit. So, these territories, have their degree of autonomy, which is ignored entirely by Trump in his calculations there, because he doesn't take into consideration at all, that this is an autonomous Inuit territory.
Well,
And
I think this is why I have been stressing the need to have this conversation in the United States. You
uh,
just said something that could fuel anti-Greenland secession opposition. Here we go again with the United States attempting to occupy native lands.
yeah,
That's what it is.
yeah,
Let me get right down to the core of it. Again, the United States want to seize native land, a land of another population of people. They're not the United States. They're not. That's what this is. That's
it's
what it
not
is.
Denmark, it's not Canada,
Right,
it's
right, right,
Greenland.
right,
Yeah,
right. It's not Denmark. It's not Canada. It's Greenland, which has indigenous people there.
yeah.
That's 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 the hallmark of the U.S. territories. Because
Hmm.
one thing the United States, even the left, does not talk about is the United States is an empire. It's not just a 48 Alaska. How they get Alaska? They bought it. How they get Hawaii? They stole it.
Hmm.
So every place the United States, quote unquote, has gotten from 1619 has been gone through force of arms, stolen treaties, maybe land purchases with Louisiana Purchase, that kind of thing. But
That's Andrew Jackson, I think, was the one who, pushed the expansion of the United States into the Mexican territories
yeah, yeah.
of the
So
western states there.
it's more expansion, and this is why I want to have this discussion, and it's not being had in the United States among the so-called left, and I don't know why.
Yeah, yeah,
We're the only ones doing it. I'm telling you. Show them in the group
yeah,
doing it, and I'll shut my mouth, and then I'll have them join the conversation because this
yeah,
is wrong. This is evil. This is just the good old Uncle Sam stealing somebody else's, want to steal someone's land. And he'll promise to pay the money and he's not going to pay it. Why? There's no treaty they've ever kept with non-Anglo people. They don't keep the treaties. No, they don't.
yeah.
That's
That's
the
right.
history. That's the
Yeah,
history of dealing with the indigenous populations. They never keep the treaties.
yeah,
And we need to
yeah.
say that.
I read that this Andrew Jackson there, who
Yeah.
occupied the Mexican territories and turned them into U.S. states of what, California, Texas,
Oh man,
Oklahoma,
whole lot. Yeah,
Arizona.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he was the one also responsible for canceling the law which granted liberated slaves the 40 acres and a mule.
Of course he
That
is.
Principle by Andrew Jackson.
There we go.
Right?
Here we go again. Here we go again. Canceling, abrogating,
Treaties.
canceling treaties with
Yeah.
non-Anglo people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there haven't been treaties broken with Anglos, but with non-Anglos, it's a good bet they're going to break the treaty. They're going to try and change the law. Look at civil rights in the United States. Trump and
Yeah.
Republicans want to take away voting rights for for black people. Here we go again. So this is what's going to happen in Greenland. This is what's going to happen. I mean,
Yeah.
we can predict this with almost certainty that if it was to be annexed, they'd have no rights. They'd never get the $1,000. They couldn't vote in elections. Just be like another Virgin Islands. I'm
Yeah.
tired of that shit.
Or Puerto
Okay,
Rico.
we got
Yeah.
Puerto Rico, same kind of thing. You'll be part
Yeah.
of our empire, but you have no rights.
Yeah.
You know,
And this Andrew Jackson guy, Jackson, that's an Anglo name,
right? Yeah, yeah.
and that indicates, that what the United States turned into was just an extension of the old British Empire,
It was, man.
but under their own name. That's
They
all. It
call
was just a continuation of the British Empire,
they call the
and they
United
continued
States
on the
not
same
United
fashion.
States, not the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
They just put states for kingdom. That's all.
Yeah, the United Kingdom of America.
I mean, basically, that's what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so I don't
And
know.
then that's why Trump, assumes he can be king because, an empire, like, well, takes it requires either a king or an emperor, like, so he does, he's not claiming to be an emperor. No, no, no. He's trying to be rational, so he's just a king. That's all, not an emperor. So he's, letting Europe take care of its own backyard. And he's trying to sort of, reconstitute the United States as a strong fortress state that is self-sufficient in all this, because it became a problem when the United States empire expanded so much, that the empire became separate from the U.S. state itself, because the U.S. corporations, which are transnational, means that they are above the state. They are more powerful than the state itself.
Yep,
These corporations, these American corporations, which control the American state, in effect, don't work on behalf of the American state anymore. They work on their own behalf. They
right,
work on behalf of an empire that is way beyond, what the continental American sort of nation state is about. No, this is an empire that is above and beyond any control from Americans. There is no sort of democratic control over the American economy. There is no democratic control over the American political scene either now, because Trump has decided that, he can assume all the powers and not leave anything else for anybody else. And he wants this to be a permanent fixture of the United States. He's not going to allow, anybody, opposition to take back control over the governmental apparatus. No way. This is political war, a political war, and he's using ICE to do it, because of the 38 million Mexican Americans, most of whom are citizens, except for 11 million who are being denied their citizenship, even though they are migrants and have gone through the whole process. These are a threat to the white supremacist joint occupation of the continent by the Anglo and German American national bourgeoisies. Okay. So their domination is being threatened. It's either their sort of identity that is maintained as being in control of the affair there, or they get voted out of office because they've lost their majority. They're on the brink because 27% Anglo-Americans, 26% German Americans barely forms a majority. And when the opposition becomes united, then with the support of the progressive Anglo and German Americans, they've lost the game. They've lost the control forever. And this is what they call replacement. They're worried about being replaced. So now these MAGA people, have used the word replacement as a substitute for the word and the concept of democracy. So that's where the United States has arrived at, because their colonial project is turning against themselves. They've colonized themselves, and they're trying to reverse the uh, loss of control that they are facing now in the face of all the migrants, in the face of the opposition amongst the former colonial mentality. No, the No Kings movement, as we can see right here in the background, composed the majority of white-skinned people. So the white supremacists are losing their control even over the white uh, nationals of the United States. This is becoming a dynamic which can assume revolutionary proportions. But I was going to ask you, I'm worried, still about, the amount of support that Trump and MAGA movement have, because in spite of all the difficulties and and empty sort of uh, rhetoric and the bombacity of kidnapping a head of state and all of that, that they're doing. Okay, so I mean, Venezuela, Trump only has like 30% support of the American population to go ahead, with an aggression against Venezuela. However, nonetheless, overall, popular support still rests at 40% for the Trump administration. So I'm still worried about that because with all the protests, it should have gone down.
Let's see where it is right now.
Hasn't.
Yeah.
So I'm
Well,
worried,
it's not.
his base of support
This
is
is what I'm
is more
saying.
solid than I had anticipated
Well,
up on that.
his net approval dropped 1.1 points. Means Trump is slightly more popular than he was at this point during his first term, but he's far less popular than Obama and George Bush. Let's see. Uh,
Uh,
let me see. Let me see. So we have 9 minus 18 minus 21. Let me see here. Look at some more stuff here. Updated pollster readings. We
Yeah,
got
because I'm sure that some of the MAGA crowd, were can be enthused, by the prospect of, taking over Greenland, thinking, oh, yes, yeah, we're going to become, bigger and greater. But there must be, like a layer of former MAGA supporters, who realize that this is, ridiculous and getting the United States into a lot of trouble, and would threaten to bring down the United States as a power rather than build itself up as a power. Because if Trump overextends, United States power and his own power within the United States, then they're going to lose the game and they're going to be overthrown, both internationally and within the United States.
okay. So here's the approval ratings. It,
Yeah.
a high that we've used from Silver Bulletin. We used this previously in our show. The
Uh,
high is 48%. The low
ooh,
is 38%. And they use
wow.
one, two, three, four, five, six, seven. They use 10 polling sources.
Uh,
So it's goes be so those are those that's the range.
okay. Yeah, that's the same as before. He hasn't
Yeah,
lost any support,
it's pretty much
maintaining.
staying the same. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Oh my. Okay. So we're still faced with a solid block. So that means the opposition has to be unified, has to get itself, organized and into a united front that can take on this challenge. And if the unions, are not there, to join in the united front, then we have to form new unions. That's what happened, when the CIO was formed, because the AFL, wouldn't sort of go and organize, the lower
Um,
paid workers. So the CIO came in, it did
yeah.
it on its own, So we need a new CIO in the United States, to organize all the minority worker populations.
Now,
Okay.
What's so interesting is his ratings on various issues are down from
Hmm.
they're down during, I mean, they've gone down during the year on immigration, the economy, trade. Everything has dropped since he began his presidency. I mean, when they
Hmm.
poll on issues, they're all down. Immigration, 10%, economy, 17%, trade,
Hmm.
inflation, 24%, trade 18%. So his net approval on issues is down on everything. Nothing, and it just seems like overall the approval, excuse me, let's look at it this way. The approval goes from 38% to 48%. That's the approval range. Low of 38%, high of 48%. That's the range of approval. So there is more disapproval than there is approval. Disapproval goes from um, 61% high to 61% to 51%. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So most people disapprove of his work. Most
Hmm.
most people polled do not approve of his work. The high disapproval is 61%. The band is from 61% to 51%. And the opposite
Hmm.
is true. Yeah. So most people disapprove of his work. The majority.
Okay. So that it just hasn't caught up, with the general support, that because there's no opposition that has gained the support of the disaffected population that was previously supporting Trump. So they end up supporting Trump anyway, even though they don't agree with his policies, because they don't have any alternative, to support.
Well, right now the Democrats hope that no kings will be there, will be how they get that support out this year in the midterm elections. They're using no
Uh,
that's the purpose of no kings to prepare for the midterm
uh,
elections.
Trump did have a loss in Arizona. There was an election in
Yeah,
Arizona recently
a
that he
big one.
lost.
A big one. That's how all the Epstein files were released because I think it was a congressman or senator from Arizona was voted in, and they moved to release the Epstein files. So, yeah,
Uh, so he had two defeats.
right. Yeah.
What was the percentage? What's the breakdown in the Arizona election? I think that he lost a considerable amount of support there. I think he lost 17% in percentage polls,
I don't
and
know.
they ended up with some a low figure like 35% or something like that.
Let's see. Arizona.
Yeah, because if that's an indication of what the upcoming midterm elections are going to turn out to be, then that would be very interesting. And then he would lose his
Well,
majority.
it says right here his approval rating fell 16% in Arizona.
Yeah,
Leading, leading story.
yeah,
Leading story.
yeah.
Right here. Yeah. So he is. Yeah, there are people who are saying that even internationally, if those elections don't go the way they want them to go, that Trump's hands might be tied a little bit. Oh wow. Over 9 months, Trump's favorability by Arizonans fell from plus 3% to minus 13%. That's a
Wow.
that's a drop of 16%.
Hmm. Hmm. Please continue with those figures. I just have to pick up my coffee that's boiling on the stove here.
No problem. This is one thing that our program does that other programs don't do. We don't mind looking at polls and looking at surveys to see what are the pollsters saying about the United States opinion. The United States populace's opinions about matters. Um, this isn't done much. I was just sharing with our viewers that one thing this show will we have no problem looking at data that are collected by sociologists and surveyors in the United States, because the voting isn't the only way you can tell how people are thinking. I'd even say it isn't, it doesn't, because most people don't vote. Most people
Hmm.
don't vote. No, they don't. Most people are not voters, but
Huh.
most people do have an opinion about what's going on. Yes, they do.
Uh-huh.
And
What
hopefully,
percentage of Americans have voted in the last election? That's an interesting feature.
yeah,
It was,
this, it wasn't, it's still, it's not high. It's very low. It's not even, let me see, maybe we can find, let's find this out. Okay.
yeah. I seem to remember it's around 55% only of the population that voted. Imagine if the entire population voted. That would change everything.
Um,
But then they make it so difficult for people to register to
well,
vote.
yeah, they want to make it difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Now we're coming right here, my friend. Let's see. Um, okay, so according to the Census Bureau, 73% are registered to vote, other people who can vote, and 65% voted, which is, not, for American, I don't know how that compares to other um, elections. But of those registered to vote, of those who were registered to vote, 6 out of 10 of them voted. So 4 out of 10 didn't vote,
Yeah.
which is a large number.
Yeah. They could
They
change
did not.
everything.
They
Those
yeah,
non-voters there, they just
yeah,
have to
yeah.
step into their, like voting booth
And
and do
boom.
it, like,
Yeah, I
and
mean
then it would
I mean
upset everything. Yeah.
that's really a lot of. I mean that's but I'm gonna say a third of the people who could vote didn't vote. So 2/3 of the people who could vote did vote. And of those who could vote, 75%, those who could be registered to vote, 25% are not registered to vote. So you still have significant people who are not registered and who don't vote. Between a quarter and a third of Americans are either not registered or who don't vote, which is a lot of people. That's
I I don't get this registration thing, because we don't have a registration to vote here in
it's
Canada.
the way
You know,
that they
like,
keep the people out of that's the way they disenfranchise you legally.
yeah, yeah, because here, like, the address that you have registered with the government, to receive your tax information, for instance, that means you're on the voters list, that your address is there, like your name is there,
No, no,
you're automatically on the voters list.
no, there is no
The only
automatic.
time you change it is if you move, then you give your new address and then they change it automatically. You don't
America
have to,
doesn't
what
have
is
a
this registration
system.
to vote? Either you're a citizen or you're not,
I
like,
mean, the way it should be done is when you're 18, whatever age it is, you are registered. That's it.
yeah,
It should be and that's because America refuses to have much done nationally. They want states to do it, which brings into corruption, racism, all kind of problems come in when states are in control of anything.
oh
America,
yeah, yeah, I remember
we
that.
have that, but
State.
I mean, I'm not saying all states
uh,
are corrupt and all states are backward, but because it's not everything, even though there are national laws about voting, voting is controlled nationally. The laws for voting are enacted nationally, but the application of voting is done by states. So
yes.
I don't,
Uh-huh.
for example, what does Mondami feel about that? I'm saying certain people could be put on the spot about that. The squad, AOC and her group, other people, the so-called progressives, because
Yeah.
this is a problem. This is where the problems of the nation are not grasped properly by the revolutionaries, I don't think.
Yeah.
There are problems of the nation where you live, And there's problems of the empire where you live. We have two kind of problems: the empire problems and the national problems.
Mm.
People, I've never heard anybody say it but me, and not because I'm so smart, I just figured this one out. So things like voting, they're getting away with murder. There's no way that when you are of legal age should mean voting. You
Yeah.
have earned the right to vote. You're registered. Party, don't worry about a freaking party. Just vote for anybody
Yeah.
you want to vote for. Anybody, and
Yeah.
that's the other thing. Well, if you're not registered in this party, you can't vote. No, anybody can vote for anybody. A
Yeah.
registration card. I'll have you registered as a party. I'm a U.S. citizen, or I have a green. How people with green cards can they vote? Answer the question. I mean, you know what I'm saying, again, it's not
Mhm.
even discussed. If
Yeah.
I have the right, if I have my birth, let's just say it's just people who have birthright citizenship. That's fine. Let's just say it's them. When I'm a
Yeah.
certain age, I can vote. Period. That's it.
Mm.
I mean, really, all you should need to prove is your driver license, Social Security card should be sufficient to
Yeah.
get a full
Yeah.
second.
With an address, like even
Yeah.
if you're not on the voters list, if you should walk in there, with your
Passport,
identification,
whatever, yeah, whatever, real ID, passport, every fucking guy here. That's it.
they should accept it,
That's it. Yeah, and I can vote for anybody or anything I want. So the issue of being in a party has to end because they do remember, this came from the founding fathers. They were a bunch of crooks and liars and evil. I see, and you can't in America you can't say they were evil because everybody's, oh
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
oh, George Washington, you wouldn't tell a
Yeah.
lie,
George Washington,
cut down
former
the
British general, who figured out, that he should jump over to the other side because they were going to win because
yeah.
they had supported France.
But I think
France, the
again,
Kingdom of France was helping the United States become independent of England.
well, but this shows again we talk about things that normally aren't even discussed. And we have to look at why it is why do we still have trouble getting people to demonstrate or somehow show opposition outside of voting? Because voting it's kind of like once every 3 or 4. That's not a regular opposition movement to vote. No,
Yeah.
no, no, it isn't. I mean, you want to bring something down, you got to be more than voting once every 3 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't.
And voting itself, is a questionable way to implement democracy, because what does it mean? Like voting. One day you get a choice, and after that you have to submit. You know, whoever, like wins
Oh,
has the absolute power, and that's it, that's all, like you have no
oh,
other say, and they
but
can do whatever they want, because they've been elected, therefore they have, the power, and they can decide for themselves, what is, even if they promise, otherwise, they can still change their mind, and just do whatever they want,
but
because they're elected.
look at this.
That's, the way democracy works, supposedly.
This is so interesting. According to census, who are the majority voters? Women are majority
Uh,
voters by 4%. And then
huh,
people with advanced degrees,
uh,
82%.
yeah,
82% are beyond a BA,
yeah,
77% with a BA,
yeah.
52% of high school graduates. So who's not voting? The working
Uh,
class.
yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
Half the working
ah.
class is disenfranchised, really.
52% of the working class. So 48% of the working class is who is registered to vote don't vote.
Yeah. Wow.
PhDs and master's degrees in the majority sector of that population vote.
Yeah.
Nine out, at least
And that
eight and a half.
sector, like is screened, like only certain people get through those, processes, of a higher education. One, you need money. Two, you need to be approved, by a professor, who has,
True,
their
true,
political prejudices, and you can't,
true.
write a dissident, material. And if you do, you lose out.
Yeah.
So
But those are
it's
the
all,
ones, those are the ones of those who are registered, those are the ones who are voting.
yeah.
Bachelors, masters, and PhDs. Oh, can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Still
Mute. There you go.
voting, and that's the area of work that has to be focused on,
Wow.
you know, not only in terms of unionization, but in terms of voting. Uh-huh.
And that's where I think where you have a union, if people are encouraged to vote,
The
therefore,
unions should be encouraging their membership to vote. Yes.
I mean, I'm saying if they're encouraged to vote in union elections, you would think they would also vote in outside the union elections. So clearly there's a problem here. The challenge to the working class. They're registered to
Yeah.
vote, but they're not voting.
Yeah. Yeah.
According to this, and this data may be off. Let's just assume it's correct, just for argument's sake. The working class is now voting, who are registered. Those with PhDs and master's degrees are voting who are registered. That's saying something right there.
Yeah.
That's actually saying that those with advanced degrees are having more influence on the country than those who are high school graduates.
Yeah.
That's
And they're voting for their own interests as well.
that's only
So
interesting.
what are their interests? Their interests are corporations for which they are working because they have, especially which is sought after by the major corporations because they're educated and so they're going to be exploited, to a greater degree. And so those, highly educated workers, they're still workers.
Right, right.
I think that their interests are identical with the interests of the corporations for which they work because they have a high position, they're getting good salaries, so therefore they want it to continue. They don't want their corporation to go bankrupt,
They
right?
sure don't. They sure don't want to go bankrupt, do they? Because their whole standard of living would go down. Right. That's a good point. Interesting. That's why looking at data can be very good to make you think about things.
Yeah,
To draw the inferences from the data. Yeah.
yeah. But the young rebels of today, they don't look at data. They don't look at
Well,
history. They think they know it all. I mean,
well,
it's a
that's
typical old
but
man's, like complaint about young people, but it's true. Like
well, but they're being guided by the ruling class ideas, like it or not. What I
yeah,
find
they don't
interesting, what I find
how
interesting,
they've become indoctrinated.
right?
They don't even know the extent to which they are. Yeah,
Yeah, what I find interesting is this new generation of Black Panthers are being
Mm.
led by the former Black Panther ideology. I find that to be a good thing. They're not
Yeah,
trying to redo the whole. We have these survival programs. We're gonna keep doing that. Okay, that's in the word
Mm.
before. Okay, good. That's your basis right there. So you learn
Mm.
from that was something good, and other things may be good or may not have been good. So social movements um, have to, I think, and I think that's social movements have to learn from at least pick things from the past they think were good. You can't just
Mm.
say it wasn't nothing good in the past. No, that's not true. That's not
Yeah,
true. No,
yeah,
no, it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. And that's
yeah,
where if you're wise enough to at least take some lessons from the past, even they may be the wrong lessons, then at least you have something to guide you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's especially true amongst the if I may refer to the Jewish people, and they're being uh, sort of corralled by the Zionist movement and the Zionist parties, which have taken control over the Jewish communities in the West and diaspora. Okay,
That's true.
so the way they've taken control over the Jewish civil society is by the funding organizations, which are controlled by the major donors, who are the Jewish national bourgeoisie, and who are pro-Zionist because the Zionist state, exists to protect the sovereign wealth of the Jewish national bourgeoisie. And the Jewish people themselves are just there, like as cannon fodder to keep control over the territory and to depopulate the territory of Palestinians. Okay, so if the young Jewish people become aware, and they are becoming aware of the like the Jewish Bundist history, they realize that you don't have to be a Zionist to be Jewish, which is what they're taught in the first place, in all the Hebrew schools. They used to be called the Talmud Torah, the study of the Torah, the study of the book of the law. Okay. And this used to be, the Jewish Judaic culture, which was, cultural, it was intellectual, and that had a sort of methodology of analysis and everything, like pill pull, and all that, was already in place, for 2,000 years. Zionists come along, and they take over the educational system. And all of a sudden, you only have Zionist education. You don't have Jewish education anymore, especially, within the state of Israel. So they don't know. They don't know for nothing. They don't know, that the Jewish people were not Zionists for not too long ago. That the Zionism is just, something that's been imposed upon the Jewish people by the white supremacist movement of the Protestant churches, which have decided that Jewish people belong in what they call Israel. And this is, like a Protestant conception that was initially, like composed in 1835. And Zionism was invented by Protestantism. It wasn't invented by Jewish people. And in fact, the most Jewish people, like Neturei Karta, who are the most Orthodox, refuse to accept, Israel as a state of the Jewish people, and including the Orthodox, who are living in Jerusalem, who are basically Palestinians and not Israelis and not Zionists, and they refuse, to do military conscription service. So, and they even go out and do direct actions and civil disobedience and block, recruitment centers. So, out of the 80,000 Orthodox uh, Jewish Israeli citizens who were conscripted and ordered to appear for, military training, of 80,000 who were called up, 2,225 showed up. You know, like,
Wow. Wow.
so,
That's
because
a
they
small
educate
sample.
themselves, they have their own, educational
Yeah.
institutions.
And
They know what it is to be Jewish other than being Zionist.
I
But the
think
rest of them, they don't know. They don't know for nothing.
I think that's the way to go. I think that's the way to go. I mean, having your own organizations gives you that's your autonomy and agency right there. If you
Yeah,
don't have that, you lose any real agency. Your autonomy is shattered, and there's no way to have an independent political view of any type. I don't have to like your view, but if you're autonomous and have agency, then you have a real independence. You do because it's like your thing. It's your thing.
yeah.
It's not us. That's it. Yep.
And you can always improve your thing, and you can
You
always
sh-
adopt
that's
additional ideas. You're independent. Independent means you can develop, you can grow, you can become stronger. But otherwise, you're just, a puppet.
right. And if you're a puppet, then United States wants you to be a puppet so they can take your land and lie to you and steal your
Yeah,
resources and steal your. I'm not saying you're a puppet because they basically steal your resources, degrade your culture, and
yeah,
keep you subservient.
yeah.
And your
And then
school
send you off as cannon fodder somewhere or other. Yeah,
and your schools will always stink.
yeah,
With subservient people, schools are all. That's just something we need to talk about the role of education in the maintenance of subservience.
yeah,
Nations in the world who are subservient to the United States, even allies as Israel, their schools aren't all that good. No, they're not. Look at the
no,
scores of Israel compared. Yeah, they may have a high tech sector, but
yeah,
the average Israeli, the average American, the average Brit.
yeah,
Virgin Islands, they ain't learning too much, man. They don't want them. All they want to learn are like the talented 10. They can learn. The rest of y'all, we want you to go back to work, you know.
yeah.
So
Even
that's a
here in Quebec, which is the most open, political scene, in all of Canada, even, compare, like when I did my PhD thesis, as an anti-Zionist, polemic, in which I analyzed, what it is to be a nation, analyze what a state is, analyze the difference between Zionism and the Jewish political culture. All of that, I wrote it down, a systematic, deductive analysis
there you go.
with an anti-Zionist conclusion, And boy, did I have trouble getting that through. Like my thesis director, he was in agreement.
They
My
didn't want that.
second thesis
Oh, no,
director,
no, no.
my first thesis director, he didn't agree, with my critique of the state, because he was, European, Swiss educated, pro Rousseau, pro, Republic of France, and all this, and nothing else could be better than that. Well, I critiqued all that. He wouldn't accept it and he dropped me. I got a new thesis director
Boy,
after finishing my thesis on my own. And then they tried to take away my defense and they tried to expel my thesis. And in the court, I took them to court. And so I questioned, how they did this. How did they expel my thesis? So the guy says, "Oh, well, we had a committee meeting and we decided, to expel the thesis." Which is not a legal procedure. There is no such, procedure to expel a thesis once, the provisional first draft of a thesis is accepted. Then you continue until you have, the necessary modifications to complete the work, and it's accepted. However, in this case, they had a secret committee meeting. The president was the thesis director. My thesis director was not invited. It was secret and decided, like with a administrator who had nothing but an MBA, was not even an academic, and they expelled my thesis and they weren't going to give me a defense. So I went to court and won a decision there, and I got my defense, and then it was accepted with cum laude, which is Latin for with goodness. So it was accepted and very well received as such. And there was one guy on the jury, who's left, Ukrainian nationalist who voted against accepting the thesis. But the Jewish academic at McGill and my thesis director, favored the thesis and awarded it a good distinction. And my thesis director wanted it to be considered excellent and like a contribution to historic academic work. But that that was not was nullified by the Ukrainian nationalist who voted against the thesis, accepting the thesis at the defense. But it was accepted. I became a doctor. And then after that, no university would hire me to teach. Like all the administrators, were freaked out, that I had overcome the uh, the veto power of the administration because they have a clause in their regulations called the prevention clause. A prevention clause means they have the power to prevent anything that they don't like in terms of the academic life of the university. But the judge said, when this was, put forward initially by the lawyer for the university administration, the way it works is, the judge said, well, is this part of your charter? Like a charter has to be approved by the provincial legislature. No, it wasn't. It was merely a regulation of the administration council. So the judge said, well, forget it. Like, your prevention clause, is prevented here and now.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that was great. Like Quebec, legal process, is very progressive, especially after the Quebecois French-speaking people took over, the judgeships and others, But before that, it was only the Anglo-Canadians who had control over the judges, and then they let in a few Jewish people. Then finally, the Quebecois, said, "Well, if you don't let us become the judges, we're going to quit and become independent." So they had to concede, that and a lot of other things as well to Quebec in order to keep it into Canada. But that wasn't enough. Quebec should have control over the St. Lawrence Seaway. That's the Suez Canal of North America.
Right.
But Quebec, you know, the control over the St. Lawrence Seaway was a treaty established between the government of Canada and the government of the United States. Quebec wasn't involved at all, even though that St. Lawrence Seaway goes through Quebec territory on both sides. But in Ontario, it's, divided half-half. And they sort of just treated that as if it applied to Quebec as well, but it never did. So Quebec could just take over the St. Lawrence Seaway and then charge transit fees, just like, Egypt charges, a passage fee, to go through the Suez Canal, as they should. So, and, that's what we have up our, if the United States wants to play rough, we'll play rough too. That's the way
Well,
it is now.
well,
So I think we've gotten into a lot of stuff that isn't talked about ordinarily.
we sure have.
And
That's
I
right.
think we need to get this out, for people to share so that we can get some strategizing happening here, and build up a real movement with ideas, that are
Oh,
well-rounded, complete, and coherent.
sounds good to me. Sounds great.
And that's what we're doing here. And that's what we've accomplished here today again for another step forward. And looking forward to meeting up with you, Steve, again next week and having these wonderful conversations, which are very stimulating and certainly indicate, how you can build a transformative political program and movement. And that's what we've done here now.
Thank you.